She had 24 hours to choose, stay free in Canada or risk everything going back. The impossible choice. The dogs were getting closer. Sarah pressed her back against the cypress tree, feeling the rough bark dig into her shoulders through her thin cotton dress. 3 miles behind her lay the Thornwood plantation, where she'd spent 17 years of her life in bondage. 3 miles ahead, if the stories were true, lay the river crossing that could lead to freedom. But between her and that crossing were men with rifles, dogs trained to hunt human beings, and a swamp that had swallowed countless souls who tried exactly what she was attempting tonight. Her hands trembled as she clutched the small bundle containing everything she owned, a knife stolen from the kitchen, a piece of cornbread wrapped in cloth, and a hand-drawn map given to her by an old woman who'd whispered, "Follow the drinking gourd north, child. The river knows the way." The baying of the hounds grew louder. They'd picked up her scent. Sarah had made her decision 3 days ago, when she'd overheard Master Thornwood tell the overseer that she was to be sold south to the cotton fields of Mississippi. "She's gotten too educated, too defiant," he'd said. "She teaches the others to read. I want her gone by week's end." That conversation had sealed her fate. Mississippi meant certain death, work to exhaustion in fields where enslaved people were considered more replaceable than the mules that pulled the plows. She would run, or she would die. There was no middle ground. The keeper of secrets. What the men hunting her didn't know was that Sarah had been preparing for this moment for 2 years. She'd learned the swamp from old Moses, a man who'd worked the land for 60 years and knew every snake den, every safe path, every trick the water played on those who didn't respect it. Before he died last winter, Moses had taught her the secrets. "The swamp don't care about your skin color, child," he'd whispered during their stolen moments by the tool shed. "It only cares if you understand it. Spanish moss grows thicker on the north side of trees. Water moccasins swim on top of the water, harmless snakes swim below. And when you're lost, listen to the frogs. They gather where the ground is solid." She'd also learned from Martha, the plantation cook, who'd survived her own escape attempt 20 years ago. Martha had been caught, punished brutally, and returned to bondage. But she'd learned the patterns of the patrol routes, the blind spots in the overseer's vigilance, and the nights when the guards drank themselves stupid. 3rd Saturday of every month, Martha had told her, pressing the crude map into her hands. "That's when they get careless. And Sarah, once you run, don't never stop. Not for nothing." Tonight was the 3rd Saturday. Into the darkness. Sarah pushed away from the tree and moved deeper into the swamp. The moon provided just enough light to see the dark water ahead, reflecting silver between the trees. She stepped carefully, testing each foothold before committing her weight. One wrong step could mean quicksand, or water too deep to cross. Behind her, she heard men's voices shouting directions. The dogs were frantic now, their baying echoing through the night. She had maybe 10 minutes before they reached this point. Her foot found a submerged log, and she used it as a bridge across a channel of dark water. Halfway across, the wood shifted beneath her weight. Sarah froze, arms outstretched for balance. If she fell in, the water would carry her scent everywhere, making it impossible to lose the dogs. She held her breath and stepped forward. The log held. On the far bank, she did exactly what Moses had taught her. She found a patch of wild onions and crushed them against her dress and shoes, masking her scent. Then she walked 20 paces into the water itself, moving parallel to the shore, before emerging onto a fallen tree that would leave no footprints. The voices behind her grew confused. The dogs, having reached the spot where her scent disappeared, circled in frustration. She went in the water, someone shouted. "Split up. Johnson, take the dogs east. Clemens, go west." She can't have gone far. Sarah allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. They'd assumed she'd crossed the water to escape. Instead, she'd used it to hide her trail before doubling back north, the last direction they'd expect her to go. The crossing. 2 hours later, exhausted and soaked to the bone, Sarah reached the river crossing. The Mississippi stretched before her, wide and dark and impossibly powerful. On the far shore, barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness, was Arkansas, and beyond that, a network of safe houses that could guide her north to real freedom. But between her and Arkansas lay a quarter-mile of deadly current. She studied the riverbank, looking for the marker Moses had described, 3 rocks stacked in a cairn, indicating the shallowest crossing point. It took her 15 minutes of searching before she found it, half hidden by undergrowth. Sarah unwrapped her bundle and took out the knife. Working quickly, she cut several lengths of vine and fashioned them into a crude rope, which she tied around her waist and attached to her bundle. If she went under, she wouldn't lose everything. The water was shockingly cold when she stepped in. The current immediately pulled at her legs, trying to drag her downstream. She'd never learned to swim. Enslaved people were forbidden from the water except for washing clothes, but Moses had taught her to read the river's moods. Don't fight the current, he'd said. Angle across it. Let it carry you, but choose your direction. She waded deeper, the water rising to her waist, then her chest. Her feet found purchase on the rocky bottom, and she began the crossing, angling upstream to compensate for the current's push. Halfway across, her foot slipped on an algae-covered stone. The river seized her, pulling her under. Water filled her nose and mouth. Panic flooded her mind. This was how it ended, drowned in the darkness, another nameless soul swallowed by the Mississippi. Then her feet touched bottom again. She pushed hard, breaking the surface, gasping for air. Her makeshift rope had held, the bundle was still attached to her waist. With the last of her strength, Sarah pushed forward. Her hands touched mud, then grass. She pulled herself onto the Arkansas shore and collapsed, coughing water from her lungs. The Watcher. She lay there for several minutes, too exhausted to move. Then she heard it, the soft sound of a footstep on the riverbank. Sarah's hand moved to the knife at her belt as she struggled to her knees. A figure emerged from the trees, silhouetted against the lightning sky. You made it across. The voice was male, quiet, with an accent she couldn't place. Wasn't sure you would. That current's taken stronger folks than you. Sarah raised the knife. Stay back. The man lifted his hands, showing they were empty. Easy now. Name's Josiah Freeman. I'm what they call a conductor on the Underground Railroad. Been watching that crossing for 3 nights, hoping you'd show up. How did you know? Martha got word to us. Said you'd be coming. He gestured to the trees behind him. Got a safe house 2 miles from here. Hot food, dry clothes, and a place to rest before we move you north. But we need to go now. Sun's coming up, and the patrol boats will be on the river soon. Sarah studied him, trying to read his face in the dim light. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. Every person she'd ever known who tried to help her had ended up punished, sold, or dead. Why should I believe you? She asked. Josiah reached slowly into his coat and pulled out a small object. He tossed it to her. Sarah caught it, a carved wooden bird, no bigger than her thumb. Moses made that, Josiah said. Gave it to me 5 years ago when I helped his grandson cross this same river. Said if I ever met a young woman smart enough and brave enough to make it across alone, I should show her that bird. Said she'd know it was real. Sarah's hand closed around the carving. She recognized Moses's handiwork, the careful detail, the smooth finish. He'd carved dozens of these over the years, giving them to children on the plantation as small gifts of beauty in a world designed to crush their spirits. Tears blurred her vision. Moses had believed in her enough to plan for this moment, even though he'd known he wouldn't live to see it. All right, she said, rising to her feet. Lead the way. The safe house. The safe house was a small cabin deep in the Arkansas woods, owned by a freed family named the Washingtons. The husband, Elijah, had purchased his freedom 15 years ago and now used his property to hide runaways on their journey north. His wife, Rebecca, fed Sarah hot cornmeal and bacon while Josiah explained the route ahead. "You can't stay here long," he said, spreading a map on the table. "Maybe 2 days to rest, then we move you to the next station. You'll travel at night, hidden during the day. It's a network of safe houses stretching all the way to Canada. 3 months if everything goes right. Longer if we run into trouble." Sarah studied the map, her educated eyes, the reading she'd learned in secret, the skill that had prompted her sail, making sense of the routes and markers. "What about the others?" she asked. "The people still back there?" Josiah's expression grew somber. "One at a time, Sarah. That's all we can do. You get north, you get free, and maybe someday you help someone else make this same journey. That's how the network grows." "But Martha. Martha knows the risks. She's helping others prepare, just like she helped you. Some people fight by running. Others fight by staying and teaching resistance from the inside." He met her eyes. "Both kinds of courage matter." That night, sleeping in a real bed for the first time in her life, Sarah dreamed of the plantation. She saw Martha in the kitchen, saw the fields where she'd worked, saw Master Thornwood's face twisted in rage when he discovered she was gone. She woke with a start to find Rebecca sitting beside her bed. "You were calling out in your sleep," the older woman said gently. "Bad dreams?" "Memories," Sarah replied. "What if they punished the others because I ran?" Rebecca's expression was understanding but firm. "They were being punished anyway, child. Slavery is punishment for being born the wrong color. You didn't create that evil, and you're not responsible for it. What you are responsible for is your own freedom, and what you do with it once you have it." The pursuit continues. On her second morning at the Washington house, Josiah burst through the door with urgent news. "Patrol crossed the river last night. They're searching properties within 10 miles of the crossing. We need to move you now." Sarah gathered her few possessions, the map, the knife, the carved bird, and a new set of clothes Rebecca had given her. As they prepared to leave, Elijah pulled her aside. "You'll face a choice soon," he said quietly. "Every runaway does. You'll have a chance to go farther, faster, if you leave others behind. Or you can slow down, take more risks, and help folks who can't help themselves. Neither choice is wrong, but you need to know who you are before that moment comes." "I already know," Sarah said, thinking of Martha, of Moses, of all the people who'd risked everything so she could have this chance. "I help." Elijah smiled. "Then you'll do just fine. Now go. And don't look back." As Sarah and Josiah disappeared into the woods, she heard the distant sound of dogs baying. The hunters were still coming. But now she had allies, a network, and most importantly, hope. The network of shadows. The station keeper's secret. 3 weeks into her journey north, Sarah learned that freedom was more complicated than simply crossing a river. The latest safe house belonged to a white Quaker couple, Thomas and Abigail Pritchard, whose farmhouse sat on the Missouri-Iowa border. They'd been hiding runaways for 7 years, operating under the cover of Thomas's work as a grain merchant. Their cellar had a false wall that concealed a room large enough to hide 8 people. When Sarah arrived, traveling with Josiah and 2 other runaways they'd collected along the way, she found the hidden room already occupied by a family, a mother, father, and 3 children, the youngest barely 2 years old. "This is the Henderson family," Abigail explained, her voice low despite the thick walls. "They've been here 4 days. We're waiting for conditions to improve before moving them to the next station." "What conditions?" Sarah asked. Thomas's face was grim. "There's a federal marshal in town. Name's Calloway. He's been sniffing around, asking questions about missing property. We think someone informed on us." Sarah's blood ran cold. You mean someone told him about this house? We're not certain yet, Abigail said. But we're being watched. Until we know more, nobody moves. That night, crowded into the hidden room with the Henderson family and two other runaways, Sarah learned their stories. Marcus Henderson had been a blacksmith on a Kentucky plantation, skilled enough that his master had allowed him to hire out his labor for extra money. Over 12 years, Marcus had saved every penny, hiding his earnings in a jar buried beneath his forge. When he'd finally saved enough to buy his family's freedom, his master had laughed in his face and sold his oldest daughter to a planter in Alabama. That's when I knew, Marcus said, his voice hard. Wasn't no legal way out. Not for me, not for my family. So we ran. His wife, Clara, held their youngest child close. We got the two little ones across the Ohio River hidden in a shipment of furniture. Marcus swam across with our middle boy on his back. But our eldest. Her voice broke. Hannah's still down there. 14 years old, and we had to leave her behind. Sarah felt the weight of their loss. She'd left people behind too, people she'd loved, people she'd never see again. The price of freedom was paid in grief. The betrayal. On the 5th day of waiting, the betrayal came from an unexpected source. Sarah had been taking her turn watching through a crack in the cellar wall when she saw a young man approach the farmhouse. He was well-dressed, clean-shaven, and carried himself with the confidence of someone educated and free. Abigail greeted him warmly at the door. "Daniel," she said. "We didn't expect you until next week." "Change of plans, Mrs. Pritchard," the young man replied. "I have urgent information about the network." Sarah couldn't hear the rest of their conversation, but something about the man's manner made her uneasy. She'd learned on the plantation to read people's intentions in their smallest gestures, the slight tightness around the eyes, the forced quality of a smile, the way someone stood when they were preparing to do violence. This Daniel was performing friendship, but beneath it, Sarah sensed something else. She hurried to where Josiah was sleeping and shook him awake. "Something's wrong," she whispered. "A man just arrived. Calls himself Daniel. Mrs. Pritchard knows him, but I don't trust him." Josiah was instantly alert. "Daniel Crawford. Young, talks fancy, works as a clerk in town. That's him." Josiah's expression turned dark. "We need to go. Now." He woke the others quickly and quietly. Marcus gathered his children while Clara wrapped the baby to keep it silent. The other two runaways, a brother and sister named James and Ruth, prepared to move. "What's happening?" Marcus whispered. "Daniel Crawford's brother owns a plantation in Mississippi," Josiah explained as he pried open the emergency exit, a narrow tunnel that led to a drainage ditch 100 yards from the house. "He's been helping the network for 2 years, but last month his brother offered him a percentage of every reward for captured runaways. I've been hearing rumors he turned, but I had no proof." "He's turned us in," Sarah said. It wasn't a question. "Most likely. Which means federal marshals are probably already on their way." Josiah gestured to the tunnel. "Single file. Sarah, you lead. You're smallest and fastest. I'll bring up the rear." They crawled through the tunnel, a claustrophobic passage barely 2 feet wide. Sarah's hands scraped against the rough earth as she pulled herself forward. Behind her, she could hear the Henderson children whimpering quietly, brave despite their terror. The tunnel seemed to go on forever. Sarah's lungs burned from breathing the stale air. Then her hands touched cold night air, and she emerged into the drainage ditch. One by one, the others crawled out. They were huddling in the ditch, preparing to run for the tree line, when they heard the sounds from the farmhouse, men's voices, the crash of furniture being overturned, Abigail's voice raised in protest. "They're searching the house," Josiah said grimly. "We have maybe 5 minutes before they find the tunnel." The impossible decision. They ran through the forest, following a path Josiah knew by heart. But the Henderson family slowed them down. The children couldn't move as fast as the adults, and the baby's crying grew louder despite Clara's attempts to soothe it. After 20 minutes of running, they reached a fork in the path. Josiah stopped them in a small clearing. "Listen carefully," he said, breathing hard. "The left path leads to a river crossing 2 miles from here. There's a boat hidden in the reeds. It'll take you across into Iowa, where there's another safe house. The right path leads to an abandoned mill where you can hide for a few days until the search dies down." "Why can't we all take the boat?" Ruth asked. Josiah's expression was pained. "Because the boat only holds 4 people safely. Maybe 5 if they're small. We're 11. We try to cram everyone in, we'll capsize and drown." The implication hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Marcus spoke first. "My family takes the boat. Sarah, Josiah, James, and Ruth hide at the mill." "No," Sarah said immediately. "The children need to go. But the adults should split up. Some take the boat, others hide. It distributes the risk." "Sarah's right," Josiah said. "But we need to decide now. I can hear dogs in the distance." This was the moment Elijah had warned her about, the choice between her own safety and helping others. Sarah made her decision in seconds. "Clara and the children take the boat. Marcus, you guide them across and stay with them, your family needs you. James, Ruth, you both go too. You're young and fast. Get across that river and keep moving north." "What about you?" Clara asked. "I'll hide at the mill with Josiah. We know how to disappear, and we move faster without children to protect." She met Marcus's eyes. "Your oldest daughter is still in Alabama. You get free, you can work to buy her out, or organize a rescue. But you can't do any of that if you're caught or killed." Marcus gripped her shoulder. "You're giving up your best chance." "No," Sarah said firmly. "I'm making sure those children have theirs. Now go, before I change my mind." The group split. Sarah watched as the Henderson family, along with James and Ruth, disappeared down the left path toward the river. Then she and Josiah turned right, toward the abandoned mill. As they ran, Sarah heard the dogs getting closer. The hunters had found their trail. The mill. The old mill stood beside a dried-up creek bed, its wooden walls weathered gray and its roof partially collapsed. Josiah led Sarah inside and up a ladder to the second floor, where the machinery had once ground grain into flour. "There's a hiding spot behind that old millstone," he explained. "Space for 2 people if they don't mind being cramped. The hunters will search this place, but that spot saved lives before." They squeezed into the narrow gap between the millstone and the wall. Through a crack in the boards, they could see the forest and the path they'd used to approach. 20 minutes later, the hunters arrived. There were 5 of them, 3 white men with rifles, and 2 enslaved men handling the tracking dogs. Sarah recognized one of the enslaved trackers, a man named Silas who'd been sold from Thornwood Plantation 3 years ago. "Dogs are going crazy," one of the white men said. "They were definitely here." "Split up," another ordered. "Check every building. And remember, there's a $50 reward for each one we bring back alive." The men separated, beginning their search. One approached the mill, rifle ready. Sarah held her breath as he entered the building below them. She could hear his footsteps on the wooden floor, hear him poking through debris with his rifle barrel. "Empty down here," he called out. "Check upstairs," someone shouted back. The footsteps moved to the ladder. Sarah's hand found the knife at her belt. Beside her, Josiah tensed, ready to fight if discovered. The hunter's head appeared at the top of the ladder. He looked around the open space, eyes scanning the old machinery, the collapsed roof timbers, the piles of rotted grain sacks. His gaze passed over the millstone where they hid. For one terrible moment, Sarah thought he would investigate further. Then one of the dogs began baying frantically in the distance. "They've picked up the scent by the river," someone shouted. The hunter at the top of the ladder turned and descended quickly. Within minutes, all 5 hunters were running toward the river, following the trail left by the Henderson family and the others. Sarah and Josiah remained motionless for another hour before finally emerging from their hiding spot. "They took the bait," Josiah said quietly. "The river trail will lead them on a chase while the boat gets your friends across. By the time they realize they've been fooled, everyone will be too scattered to track." "What about the Pritchards?" Sarah asked. "What happens to them?" Josiah's expression was grave. "Thomas and Abigail knew the risks. They'll claim ignorance, say they had no idea their cellar was being used. It might work. It might not. But they made their choice, same as we all did." The Underground Railroad. Over the next 6 weeks, Sarah and Josiah navigated the complex network of the Underground Railroad. They stayed in houses, barns, church basements, and root cellars. They traveled by night, hidden during the day. They crossed rivers, forests, and prairies, always moving north. At each station, Sarah met people who were risking everything to fight slavery without ever firing a shot. White abolitionists who believed in justice. Free black families who remembered their own escapes. Native Americans who had runaways in their communities. Even a few brave souls who were still enslaved but used their positions to pass information and supplies to those running. She also met other runaways, each with their own story of suffering and survival. A young woman who'd been separated from her children. An elderly man who'd spent 60 years in bondage before finally running at age 70. A teenage boy who'd watched his mother sold away and decided he'd rather die free than live enslaved. Each person strengthened Sarah's resolve. She wasn't just running for herself anymore. She was part of something larger, a movement of resistance that stretched across the country. In Illinois, they stayed with a conductor named William Still, a free black man who kept detailed records of every runaway he helped. "Someday," he told Sarah, "these stories need to be told. The world needs to know what you survived, and what you overcame." In Wisconsin, they joined a group of 12 other runaways making the final push toward Canada. Among them was a young man named Isaiah who'd escaped from the same region as Sarah. He shared news from back home, news that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Martha's gone," he said quietly. "The cook who helped people get out. Master Thornwood figured out she was involved with the Underground Railroad. He made an example of her." Sarah felt as if she'd been struck. "Is she?" "She's alive," Isaiah said quickly. "But they sold her south, to the cotton fields. Same fate she helped you escape." The guilt hit Sarah like a physical blow. Martha had sacrificed herself to save others, and now she was suffering the consequences. Josiah saw the pain in Sarah's expression. "Martha knew what she was doing," he said gently. "She made a choice, just like you did back at the mill. You honor her sacrifice by getting free and using that freedom to fight back." "How?" Sarah demanded. "How do I fight an entire system?" "Same way we've been fighting all along," Josiah replied. "One person at a time. One journey at a time. One act of resistance at a time." The final crossing. On a cold morning in late autumn, Sarah stood on the American shore of the Detroit River, looking across at Canada. Freedom was less than a mile away. The group of runaways had gathered before dawn, preparing for the final crossing. A conductor named George de Baptiste had arranged for a small boat to ferry them across in groups of 4. Sarah was in the last group. As she waited for the boat to return, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. 3 months ago, she'd been enslaved, considered property, denied even the basic right to control her own life. Now she stood on the threshold of freedom, real freedom, legal freedom, the kind that couldn't be taken away by slave catchers or federal marshals. The boat returned, and Sarah climbed in with Josiah and 2 others. As they pushed away from shore, she looked back at the country that had enslaved her, that had brutalized her people for centuries, that still claimed ownership over millions of souls. "Will you come back?" Josiah asked quietly. Sarah thought of Martha, suffering in a cotton field. She thought of Hannah Henderson, still enslaved in Alabama. She thought of all the people still in chains, still fighting, still hoping. "Yes," she said firmly. "Once I'm free, once I'm safe, I'll come back. Not to live, but to help others escape. To be a conductor like you." Josiah smiled. "That's what I hoped you'd say. The network always needs people who understand both sides of the river." The boat touched the Canadian shore. Sarah stepped onto the dock and felt Canadian soil beneath her feet for the first time. She was free. But her fight had only just begun. End of Part 2. The Conductor's Return. Building a New Life. Sarah's first winter of freedom was spent in a small black community outside Toronto. The Canadian government had welcomed thousands of formerly enslaved people, and the community had organized to help newcomers build lives in their adopted country. She found work as a seamstress, using skills she developed on the plantation to earn wages for the first time in her life. The concept of being paid for her labor was initially strange. She'd been conditioned to expect only punishment or, if she was lucky, indifference. But the community helped her adjust. She lived in a boarding house run by a woman named Elizabeth Freeman, who'd escaped slavery 20 years earlier and now dedicated her life to helping new arrivals. "Freedom takes practice," Elizabeth told her. "You've spent your whole life being told what to do, when to wake, when to sleep, when to speak. Now you have to learn to make choices for yourself. It's harder than you'd think." Elizabeth was right. Sarah found herself paralyzed by simple decisions: what to eat, what to wear, where to go. The absence of external control created a vacuum that terrified her. But slowly, she adapted. She learned to read newspapers, expanding the literacy she developed in secret. She attended community meetings where formerly enslaved people discussed politics, organized mutual aid, and planned rescue operations. And she thought constantly about going back. The letter. 6 months into her Canadian life, Sarah received a letter forwarded through the Underground Railroad network. It was from Rebecca Washington, the woman who'd sheltered her in Arkansas. The letter contained devastating news. "Dear Sarah, I write with a heavy heart. The Pritchard farm was raided last month. Thomas and Abigail were arrested and charged with violating the Fugitive Slave Act. They're facing prison. Daniel Crawford testified against them, confirming that they knowingly harbored runaways. The network in Missouri is badly damaged. We need conductors willing to take risks, to rebuild what was lost. I know you're safe in Canada, and no one would blame you for staying. But if you're willing to help, we desperately need you." Sarah read the letter 3 times, her hands shaking. Thomas and Abigail had risked everything to help her escape. Now they were paying the price, facing years in prison for the crime of believing in human dignity. She could stay in Canada, build a safe life, and put the horrors of slavery behind her. Or she could return to the dangerous work of the Underground Railroad, risking recapture every time she crossed back into the United States. The choice should have been simple. But Sarah remembered what Marcus Henderson had said: "Your oldest daughter is still down there." She remembered Martha, sold south for helping others escape. She remembered every person still in chains, still suffering, still hoping for freedom. The training. Sarah's decision to become a conductor was met with mixed reactions in the Canadian community. Some praised her courage. Others questioned her sanity. "You're free," one man argued at a community meeting. "Why would you risk that? If you're caught in the United States, they'll enslave you again, or worse." "Because freedom isn't just about me," Sarah replied. "As long as one person remains enslaved, none of us are truly free. I can't sit here in safety while people I could help are suffering. Elizabeth Freeman pulled her aside after the meeting. If you're serious about this, you need training. Being a runaway and being a conductor are different skills. Over the next 3 months, Sarah learned those skills from experienced conductors who regularly crossed the border. She learned navigation by stars and natural landmarks, codes and signals used to identify safe houses, disguise techniques for traveling in slave states, methods for forging free papers, how to spot and avoid slave catchers, emergency protocols when operations went wrong, ways to calm frightened runaways and keep groups moving. She also learned to shoot. A conductor named Harriet, who'd made 19 trips back into slave territory, taught her. I've never had to kill anyone, Harriet said as she showed Sarah how to load and fire a pistol. But I've been prepared to. Sometimes the threat is enough. Sometimes it's not. You need to know which situations are which, and you need to be ready for both. Sarah practiced until she could hit a target reliably at 20 paces. She prayed she'd never have to use the skill on a human being. The first mission. In the spring of 1853, Sarah crossed back into the United States for the first time since her escape. Her mission was straightforward on paper: travel to a plantation in Kentucky, make contact with a family of 4 ready to run, guide them north through the network to Canada. The journey would take approximately 6 weeks if everything went according to plan. Everything, of course, never went according to plan. Sarah traveled disguised as a free black woman working as a domestic servant for a white abolitionist merchant. The forged free papers identified her as Mary Johnson, from Philadelphia. The merchant, a man named Samuel Webb who was part of the network, would provide cover for her presence in Kentucky. They traveled by train and riverboat, maintaining the fiction of master and servant. Sarah played the role perfectly, eyes downcast, voice quiet, movements subservient. It made her sick to act enslaved again, but the disguise was necessary. In Louisville, Samuel left her at a boarding house run by a conductor named Mrs. Patterson. That night, Sarah met with a contact from the plantation, a man named Jacob who worked in the stables and had been secretly coordinating the escape. The Brooks family's ready, Jacob told her. William, his wife Sarah, same name as you, and their 2 sons, ages 9 and 12. William's a carpenter. Master's been hiring him out in town, so he knows the area. Sarah does laundry. The boys work in the fields. Why now? Sarah asked. What changed? Jacob's expression darkened. Master's in debt. Planning to sell the boys separate from their parents. The family figured they'd rather die together in freedom than live apart in slavery. Sarah knew that feeling intimately. When can they leave? 2 nights from now. New moon, less light for the patrols. I'll bring them to the meeting point at midnight. You'll need to have them across the Ohio River by dawn. The Brooks family. Sarah met the Brooks family at an abandoned tobacco barn 3 miles from the plantation. They arrived terrified, carrying almost nothing, just the clothes on their backs and a few precious items hastily gathered. The youngest boy, Samuel, clutched a wooden horse his father had carved. The older boy, Moses, carried a knife and watched the darkness with the alertness of someone who expected violence at any moment. William Brooks was a tall man with carpenter's hands, scarred from years of labor. His wife Sarah had the exhausted eyes of someone who'd witnessed too much suffering. They both looked at Sarah with a mixture of hope and desperation. "You're really going to get us out?" William asked. "I'm going to try," Sarah replied honestly. "But you need to understand what we're facing. It's 150 miles to the Ohio River. Then we cross into Indiana, travel through Illinois, reach Michigan, and finally cross into Canada. 6 weeks minimum. Maybe more. Every day we'll be in danger. Every night we'll be cold and hungry. If we're caught, you'll be returned to your master and punished severely. I'll be enslaved again, or killed. And if we don't go? Sarah Brooks asked quietly. Your sons will be sold. You'll likely never see them again. The couple exchanged glances. No more words were necessary.